Welcome back to the program. I have a bunch of hot takes today. The World Economic Forum meeting is here. Oh no, they're back. Another bad budget deal in Congress. Joe Biden and Karine Jean-Pierre keep blaming GOP for border chaos. I have a movie review for you today. How about that? I'll check in on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and also Taiwan's election outcome angers China. No way. Get out of here. All right, starting off with some talk about the World Economic Forum. It's that time of year again. The collective geniuses are meeting. The meeting runs from today, the 15th to the 19th. Approximately 2,800 people gather in Davos, Switzerland. It's the rich, famous, well-connected, elected leaders, entrepreneurs, all gathering to decide how the rest of us are going to live in the future. Global warming is their favorite topic. With that in mind, of course, if you were there for the past few days, you would see hundreds of private jets landing and taking off, individuals with their entourages, country leaders arriving in commercial-sized jets, tons of fossil fuels being burned. CO2 will rise into the atmosphere, but no matter. Remember now, they're going to tell you what to drive, how to move around, what to eat. That's bugs, by the way. Bugs are coming into your diet. And they will all do the opposite, as we'll see during the week with the debauchery, prostitution, the best accommodations, the best food, the best drink, spending taxpayers' money from their home countries. Must be quite an ego boost to be part of this event, though, I must say. Let's not deny many of these people are some of our best educated, most well off. Their worldview is just warped. Their belief that they can control the 7 billion of us based on their worldview, their ideology, what they think is best for us, of course, is just silly. It's run by Klaus Schwab, right out of central casting. Overweight, bald, pompous, arrogant, a German trying to take over the world. Say it ain't so. He has an impressive resume, very well educated. Again, their worldview, what they think is possible, who they think they get to tell what to do is what makes this group so cringeworthy. I like to see their website from time to time and see what they say about themselves. You can see here on the screen what they're about. WF provides a global, impartial, that's humorous, and not-for-profit platform for meaningful connection between stakeholders to establish trust and build initiatives for cooperation and progress. Stakeholders, when you see that word, buckle up. In their strategy for more than 50 years, the forum has developed historic initiatives, that's for sure. Industry breakthroughs, not sure what they're referring to here. Economic solutions and thousands of collaborations improving the state of the world. So they were established 50 years ago. And how is the state of the world better today than it was 50 years ago? You can go to their site, obviously, World Economic Forum. You can find it online, find all the details you want. This group is about globalization, the elimination of the nation state, a global governance, a single global currency. And remember now, in order to get there, they need to take on the big guy on the block, and that's the United States. You can see here on the screen, they survey a good portion of the leaders who will attend the event and ask them to select up to 5 risks that you believe are most likely to present a material crisis on the global scale in 2024. Not surprisingly, extreme weather at the top. So that's global warming, right? Or how we call it now, climate change. Silly. If you want to talk about this, you call it, say global warming. And we can see extreme weather. So that's just the narrative. That's just the scare tactic. We have lots of extreme weather all the time. And we have record low levels of human beings being hurt by extreme weather. AI-generated misinformation and disinformation. Glad. AI should be stomped on, should be stopped. Societal and political polarization, that's true. Driven again by globalists, really. Cost of living crisis, bad public policy. Remember now, the World Economic Forum wants to do away with fossil fuels. They want to go renewable. And when we think about that process, the way it's being conducted, the forced transition, that is a big factor for the cost of living crisis. not to mention the globalization of trade, which really means dependence on China to manufacture things for the world, cyber attacks, economic downturn, disrupted supply chains for critical goods and resources. Think COVID, think China, escalation or outbreak of armed conflict. Do you think? What do you mean escalation or outbreak of armed conflict? How many more armed conflicts can we have on the planet right now? So that might be thinking about the expanded war in the Middle East, additional countries that may be under attack from Russia, China taking Taiwan, Venezuela going after Guyana, attacks on critical infrastructure. That's part of the tensions of the world we're in. Disrupted supply chains for food, censorship, erosion of free speech. Again, that's on them. WF is all about controlling speech. Anyway, you can see the rest of the list. As you probably gathered, not a huge fan of the WEF. Okay, the other thing I want to talk about today is the most recent budget deal negotiated by House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York. Johnson, who was just recently installed as Speaker, replacing Kevin McCarthy, said that this deal won't satisfy everyone and does not cut as much spending as many of us would like. Goes on to say this deal provides us a path to, one, move the process forward. That's a horrible thing to say. This is your job, constitutional responsibility. You're paid $175,000 a year, moving the process forward. Get your job done. Reprioritize funding within the top line towards conservative objectives. Not going to succeed when you're dealing with Schumer. Instead of last year's Schumer-Pelosi omnibus deal. Remember now, Republicans had control, but they used a continuing resolution to keep that deal going from 2021. And number three, fight for the important policy riders. What he's referring to there is future spending needs, requirements. Democrat leadership hailed the agreement, of course, because they won, because they're happy, because there was little to no spending cuts. It was more go along to get along, kick the can down the road stuff. Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries put out a joint statement. We have made it clear to Speaker Mike Johnson that Democrats will not support including poison pill policy changes in any of the 12 appropriation bills put before the Congress. By securing a $772.7 billion non-defense discretionary funding, we can protect key domestic priorities like veteran benefits, healthcare, and nutrition assistance from the draconian cuts sought by right-wing extremists. So to cut federal spending in the face of $2 trillion annual deficits and $34 trillion in debt is the role of an extremist, and of course, a right-wing extremist. I don't have to really bother comment much more about that. That's just silly. And eventually, whether we like it or not, we are going to have to cut spending and balance the budget. We will not escape the damage of what's been done for the past 40 years, 50 years. So the deal is, I've seen a couple different numbers, but we have 1.55 trillion and 1.66 trillion in discretionary spending. Of that, 888 billion is for defense. And so we have 700 to 880 billion for non-defense discretionary spending, which also includes interest on the national debt, which is approaching $1 trillion. Again, as I've said, to kick the can down the road again. Fiscal year 2024 began October 1st, 2023. It ends September 30th, 2024. This is the 13th or 14th year in a row where Congress has failed their constitutional responsibility to have a budget passed and signed by the president by October 1st in the new fiscal year. Congress has been using continuing resolutions. That is to say, whatever was passed in some years prior will be used again in the current year until we can come to some agreement. So we keep having increases in spending, keep having increases in deficits because nothing's changing the budget because they can't come to terms on a deal. We're only 3.5 months into fiscal year 2024, and we're already running over $1 trillion deficit for the fiscal year. Shame on you elected officials in both parties. Now, what's missing from this conversation, of course, is mandatory government spending. And that's predicted to sum up to around $4.2 trillion for fiscal year 2024. And mandatory spending consists primarily of programs such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, other health programs, Discretionary spending consists of spending controlled by lawmakers through annual appropriation acts. Now, that definition I got from the CBO. Discretionary spending consists of spending controlled by lawmakers. There is a belief out there that mandatory spending is no longer under the control of the lawmakers, of Congress. That's just not true. Congress passed the laws that make mandatory spending mandatory. Congress can change those laws. And if we want to be serious about cutting annual deficits and about stopping the growth in national debt and maybe even reducing it, mandatory government spending programs have to be on the chopping block. That's where the money is. That's where there's lots of waste, abuse, overspending. That's also where some of the most important constituent services are. Social Security benefits, access to health care, medical care. Those are easy programs to pull on the heartstrings of others. How could we possibly cut these programs? Well, we're going to have to do it. It may be means testing. It may be being more efficient. It may be cutting waste. It may be cutting fraud. Maybe a combination of all these things. But if we're ever going to reduce our annual budget deficits and begin to drop our total outstanding federal debt and reduce our interest payments, mandatory spending must be on the table. Let's take a look at this graphic. It's not the current year graphic. It's not for 2024, but this will give you some of the insights into the programs we're talking about that elected officials are so afraid to touch because they want to get reelected. And these are meaningful programs, no question. These help people. So you can see here on the right-hand side of this graphic, the details of these mandatory outlays: Medicare, Medicaid, premium tax credits, and others, old age and survivors insurance, disability insurance, earned income child and other tax credits, supplemental nutrition assistance program, supplemental security program, family support and foster care, child nutrition, unemployment compensation, civilian benefits, military benefits, veterans income security. People rely on this stuff, no question about it. So not easy to do, but it must be done. And to ignore mandatory spending in public, and we talk about the budget deal each year, is an insult to the American populace, to citizens, to taxpayers. We are going to have to begin to elect members of the House and the Senate who are willing to cut spending. We do not have a revenue problem. Tax revenue, fees are at the highest level they've been in American history, as of course is spending. You know the options: to cut annual deficits, to present a balanced budget or a budget in surplus. We must either reduce spending, increase taxes, or some combination of both. And I would argue we should start with cutting spending. All right, the other thing I want to mention real quickly, immigration. As everyone knows in the country now, anyone that lives near a big city, we have a serious immigration problem fostered by President Joe Biden, who is running an open border immigration policy right now and has invited millions and millions of people from around the world to come to America and live off the taxpayers' dime. America has benefited from immigration in the past. We will in the future. Legal immigration is how we should run our immigration policy. Our borders should be secure. We should not be allowing people to cross our border willy-nilly. To be illegal is to enter the United States outside a legal port of entry. Now, supporters of President Biden's policy would suggest that government officials are at the border where these people are coming across, even though it's not a legal border crossing. And because they're interacting with government officials, that's a legal port of entry. But they're still coming to the country without permission, without visas. They're still breaking the law. We have laws in the books about this. They've been on the books for decades. President Biden just the other day blamed the Republican Party for the border chaos, for the immigration problems. Karine Jean-Pierre, every time she gets an immigration question at the White House press conference or press briefing, she blames Republicans. And what they're blaming Republicans for is the stall of a supplementary request of funding by the Biden administration, $106 billion to support Ukraine, Israel, and the border. What's to blame for the crisis is an unwillingness to enforce current immigration laws, to actually have a border that's secure. You can't come across the border, period. The easy way to solve this problem in immigration is just to say no. You can't come across, period. That's it. Something like 8 to 9 million people have been allowed in illegally since President Biden took office. Now, many will disagree with this word I'm using, illegal, because they'll claim they're refugees. But there's a process for refugees as well, and this is not it. I believe this is called gaslighting. Let's put this definition up on the screen. Victims of gaslighting are deliberately and systemically fed false information that leads them to question what they know to be true, often about themselves. They may end up doubting their memory, their perception, and even their sanity. Gaslighting psychology today. We have an immigration problem. And right now it's on the Democrats and President Biden. Republicans are not doing what they can do to help this. Republicans advocate for more green cards, more immigration, just like Democrats. But at least Republicans want to control the border. All right, enough of that. A movie review for you today. Society of the Snow. The second official big movie made about the rugby players who survived a plane crash in the Andes Mountains by eating the remains of the dead. This is directed by J.A. Bayona. Sorry if that pronunciation isn't quite right, J.A. My apologies. 45 people were on board a Fairchild turboprop aircraft departing from Montevideo, Uruguay, to go to a rugby match in Santiago, Chile. On October 12, 1972, they left Montevideo. They were on the way to Santiago, Chile, but had to stop in Mendoza, Argentina, because of heavy winter weather, unexpected. It was springtime, but they still had a serious winter season happening. And then they flew from Mendoza over the Andes to Santiago, Chile. Now, having had to land in Mendoza, again, because of bad weather, from Mendoza, they had to fly south along eastern side of the Andes to find a location where the mountains were low enough to fly over. Once they reached that point, the pilots turned west. They got into some more cloud cover and storm conditions, and they turned right north too soon. They hadn't made it over the Andes yet. They were flying towards Curacao, Chile. They turned right too soon, traveling north over the Andes, where the mountain ranges begin to rise up again. Came out of the cloud cover, descending out of the cloud cover, realized they were amidst in the mountain peaks in a violent crash. 45 people on board the Fairchild turboprop jet. 12 people were killed in the crash. 17 died of injuries days later from the elements, lack of food, and 16 survived the ordeal and escaped the mountain. The heroes were Robert Canessa and Nando Parado. They had walked 38 miles in 10 days until they found Sergio Catalan, the man on the horse, in a valley. It's a remarkable story. I first read the book in my early 20s. You can see here the image of the book cover by Pierce Rawl Reed, and still the best source, I think, for this story. If you haven't read this story, get that book and read it. I was riveted. What a fascinating story of human survival. Think of the experiment. A unique population, young men from well-off and wealthy households, well-educated, medical students, athletic and healthy. A rugby team chartered the plane, had some empty seats, so invited family and friends and some strangers to fill up the plane so they could afford the trip. Going to Santiago, Chile to play a rugby match against an English rugby team. I believe they were called the Christians, the boys from Uruguay. So from a religious family, again, a really unique subset of the population thrown into this situation. So Society of the Snow, again, directed by J.A. Bayona. I'll give the movie 2.5 stars out of 5. Not a fan. I fast forwarded through a lot of it. It was sometimes mind-numbingly boring. The actors they chose didn't look like the men they were portraying. Way too much foreshadowing in the script. Too much time of the camera up close on faces in anguish and despair. Insufficient narration about the story, the background. I found the portrayal of the inside of the plane inaccurate based on the reading of Alive and some other documentaries. I'll comment on one in just a moment here. They had hung hammocks in the plane for the worst injured. The reenactments of the actual photos weren't accurate. The body positioning wasn't right. The rescue scene was boring when Canessa and Nando finally walked that 36 miles over the Andes, 10 days, and they find the man on the horse, Sergio. And then what happens from there, how they communicate with the rock and a note on a rock. And then when the military comes in, and then when they fly the helicopters up into the mountain to find their friends. So I thought the rescue scene was boring. It was drama by lighting. It was drama by long in terms of time camera shots. I will say I thought the portrayal of the actual crash scene was very well done, very dramatic, real sense of the horror there. Alive, the movie Alive with Ethan Hawke, I thought was much better. A little cheesy, not as well produced, I would say. But of course, that movie was produced long ago. But Alive, the movie, was more dramatic, more inclusive of the full story, better rescue scenes. Now, there are a bunch of documentaries to find online, some docuseries. But if you really want to, apart from the book, if you want to get a really, really good movie, video, documentary about this story, go with Stranded. I've come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. Directed by Gonzalo Arellano, starring the actual survivors with before unheard thoughts and feelings. Really well done. A beautiful soundtrack. Really interesting camera usage. So 2.5 stars out of 5 for Society of the Snow. I would put Alive, the movie, as better than this. The book, of course, is fantastic and gives you much more information than this movie ever would. And then for the documentary style of movie, you want to go with Stranded. I've come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. All right, let's get into something more serious. Let's go ahead and check in on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So here's the most recent map of southeastern Ukraine, presented by the Institute for War. A great source, by the way. I think it's isw.org. Really good source. It's a U.S. group. You can see the map here, what Russia controls from Luhansk all the way to Kherson. We're approaching the second anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, led by President Putin. The opposing forces have been at stalemate for some months now. The summer offensive by Ukraine was unsuccessful for a number of reasons, including delaying the start of that offensive, allowing Russia much more time to dig in, creating strong, layered defensive positions. Hundreds of thousands are dying on both sides. Millions more are being displaced. And whole cities and towns wiped out. Russia's military is brutal. How they perceive life, value life compared to us is quite different. They're destroying everything in their path, leaving Ukraine with nothing. Now, it's increasingly obvious that the U.S. is growing weary of the effort to support Ukraine. We're in for over $50 billion and growing. The October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas terror group has distracted the world from the horror that is continuing to rage in eastern Ukraine. And when Putin gets angry because Ukraine does something effective, the rest of Ukraine suffers as well through missile strikes, drone strikes. Russia continues to get their ass kicked on the ground. Their military is clearly not what we thought, and they don't seem to be learning from their mistakes over 2 years. However, their leader doesn't care about his citizens. Putin will send as many men into the war as needed. They have comparatively huge amounts of military equipment to lose. Putin wants his land bridge to Crimea and the warm water ports of the Black Sea. He doesn't want access to Crimea just through the southern Russia, across the Kursk Bridge. No, he wants that land bridge, which you can see in the map here, from southwestern Russia straight down to Ukraine, the Black Sea. It's becoming increasingly clear the chances of Ukraine kicking Russia off their territory, including Crimea, are falling. It's becoming increasingly likely this war will end by peace negotiations and with Russia taking control of eastern and southern Ukraine from Luhansk to Kherson, south of the Dnipro River. Negotiations will only take place, or for that matter, succeed, if the US and our allies are still fully engaged in support of Ukraine financially and militarily. If, as I suspect is likely, US willingness to do so diminishes, especially if we get GOP control in 2025, Putin will know he won't have to go to the negotiating table. He can keep what he has of Ukraine and perhaps try for the whole country again. And so the time to negotiate is a time when America is still engaged, when America is still providing equipment, military support, financial support. Because once that begins to wane, obviously in public, Putin will know he doesn't have to budge. I know Ukrainians hate to hear this. Ukraine cannot take the long road with Russia. Russia is just too big. Take a look at this infographic from the Council on Foreign Relations. Here's America's spending on the Ukraine war since January 2022 through October 31st, 2023. Notice the humanitarian financial assistance. We are paying the salaries of government workers. We are paying the pensions of Ukrainian citizens. So you got 2.7 billion for humanitarian aid, 26.4 billion for financial aid. Notice well above 50 billion here, 75.4 billion in total. Security assistance, 8.3 billion. Weapons and equipment, 23.5 billion. Grants and loans for weapons and equipment, 4.5 billion. We run a $2 trillion budget deficit for the past few years, and again in 2024. We borrow over half of our daily needs in terms of government spending. This money that we're spending in Ukraine, we borrow. We pay interest on. It's a lot. My heart goes out to the Ukrainians, of course, and the poor Russians who are suffering and struggling as a result of Putin's war. All right, one last thing today. Taiwan, China. China is not happy about the outcome of the Taiwan presidential elections. Taiwanese voters ignored the threats from China about the election outcomes. Taiwan's ruling Democrat Progressive Party candidate, the current vice president, Lai Ching-te, won the race and will be the new president for Taiwan for the next 4 years. He's not a unifier. He wants independence for Taiwan and talks about it openly. China did its usual thing, of course, ignored the outcome, said Taiwan is part of China. And as China's president Xi Jinping has said many times, China and Taiwan reunification is a historical inevitability. He will take the island nation back by force. Now, what's interesting about this is the response from the US government. Remember now, Joe Biden's been in office forever. He's been a supporter of Taiwan in his years in the Senate, always. On Saturday, according to Reuters, Joe Biden said the United States does not support the independence of Taiwan. Meanwhile, we have Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, congratulated Lai Ching-te on his victory and said the United States is committed to maintaining cross-strait peace and stability and the peaceful resolution of differences free from coercion and pressure. Meanwhile, President Biden, just in August, Biden approves military aid to Taiwan on a program normally used for sovereign states. Where are you, Joe, on this? China is going to take back Taiwan. The timing is uncertain, and it won't be easy. And the question is, how will the U.S. react? We have, by action, made it quite clear we're supporting Taiwan's effort to remain independent. And what I mean by that is use of our military, selling military equipment to Taiwan, traversing the strait between Taiwan and China with our aircraft and our naval ships. We ignore China's demand that we stay outside their exclusion zone, which for China means way beyond the 12-mile distance from their coastline. So Joe Biden's trying to play it both ways. All right, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget, always try to buy American.